While the DAW you choose does not matter in regards to sound quality, as it has zero impact on sound, there are some things you need to consider when picking one out. So, what should you look for? And why does your first choice actually matter so much? Well, let's take a look at that and what your options are out there. This is where a lot of people start out, as they aren't exactly making money hand over fist to start. Also, free DAWs are a great way to get started in editing and to teach you that learning curve. Audacity is usually the top of the list for many people, though there are a lot of companies that are releasing free versions of their full suites, and these are actually worth looking at if you will end up with them anyways. So if you think your workflow will end up in Pro Tools, we'll start with Pro Tools first. If you're on Mac, GarageBand does transfer to Logic rather easily as well. So by keeping your options open and being honest with yourself when you start, you may save yourself a bunch of time in the long run. We'll talk about why that's important in a bit. And really, Reaper is the only one I'm going to be able to include here. $60 gets you the full version, even though the free version is just as good. And quite literally, you're getting a DAW that is not only powerful, but it also has a ton of learning material online. And that's because a lot of people have been adopting it as their go-to DAW. I mean, in a world where all the free DAWs have big drawbacks or limitations, $60 looks pretty attainable, right? Now, the only downside to Reaper would be the learning curve. It isn't any worse than Pro Tools for sure, but looking at something like Persona Studio One, it's pretty easy to see which is easier to use. Otherwise, the only other issue is the bundled plugins. You don't really get many, or any. Though with any DAW, the included stock plugins will only get you so far anyways, so I don't know how much of a loss that is. Next up, we have the next most affordable option. And I know a lot of people don't like the subscription model, though with cloud-based models like Adobe, this has made professional-grade editing available to more people. And yes, most notably, Adobe does have one of the more attractive models of DAWs with Audition. It is as close as perfect as you're going to get for voice editing, and it has a ton of positives. We'll get into that in a bit, don't worry. Another benefit to this is that Adobe is amazing for multiple apps working together. And while the price can get quite steep, it is on sale every Black Friday, so it might be worth to save up for that. Now, I'm sure there are others, but the only other one I can think of is Pro Tools. Two of the biggest DAWs in their respective fields are accessible for a few bucks a month, which makes something like Pro Tools First a very attractive starting point. But of course, all this info is great, but your choice may have a lot more to do with what you're recording rather than the depth of your wallet. So that is your next decision, though it should be an easy one. Now, all I'm about to say aside, can you use Reaper for voiceover? Yes, Booth Junkie does it. Can you use Pro Tools for podcasting? Hell yes. Radio stations have been moving over to it for the last little while. But can you record an album with Audition? No, at least not without a lot of migraine medication. Now, this isn't specifically true for everything, but if you're a voiceover professional and you are only ever going to record one source, buying an expensive DAW doesn't make much sense. Or if you're looking into recording music, Hindenburg isn't going to make much sense either. You see, a lot of these DAWs tend to lean towards different yet specific tasks. Ableton is great for live work and beat matching. FL Studio or Fruity Loops is great for electronic music. And Cakewalk is for psychopaths who enjoy being miserable. Kidding, that's Audacity. But remember, while some of the bigger and more expensive DAWs are focused on full studio recording, some of the others might suit your style better. So do a bit of research before you decide which is right for you, because your future workflow does kind of depend on it. And here is the crux of the argument for picking up a DAW. One of the things that most people don't realize is when you've learned a workflow for a specific DAW, it can be really frustrating to have to learn a whole new workflow for a whole new different DAW. You literally develop muscle memory when you use a DAW long enough, and you can almost edit a whole file without even actively thinking about what you're doing. For example, the podcast I edit, called Minds of Madness, it takes me approximately 3 hours to do a pacing edit. Basically listening through and taking out the breaths or the long pauses or even some extraneous sounds. That's about as quick as I can do it, and it suits me just fine. Now, if I were to try that on another DAW, there are completely different systems in place, and it'll take me 2 to 3 times longer to do the same edit. Even things as simple as grabbing and moving the section can be different. And until you're used to it, it's going to slow you down. This is why I encourage you to consider exactly which DAW you want when you start and then work towards that. Once you're getting paid to do the work, the last thing you want to be doing is switching platforms and slowing down your workflow. No matter which one you choose though, make sure it has all the options you want for the work you're doing. That way, you won't be forced to grind your studio to a halt while you hunt and peck your way through a new DAW. In fact, the podcast I mentioned earlier, Minds of Madness, he still uses Audacity to record and master his podcast. This is an exceptionally successful podcast, and it's his full-time job, so why is he using a free DAW to do his whole show? Well, he's now at the point that learning another DAW will inhibit him immediately. Even though learning a new DAW would probably end up making his life easier in the long run, the here and now is more important. That's why your first choice actually matters. So then what do I use, recommend, and why? Well, I use multiple and for different reasons. First off, I'm a big Adobe user. Yes, I know there are cheaper options out there and you can do almost the same thing with something like Hindenburg. But honestly, for my workflow and time, Audition is it for me. What takes 3 actions in Audacity or 2 in Hindenburg will only take 1 action in Audition. The ability to edit single waveforms, the ability to see the differences that the effects have on those waveforms is all a big deal for me. The ability to easily run through and just edit. I mean, Audition has been around a long time, and there's a reason it was an industry staple for radio for a long time. They have mastered workflow. And that makes my time worth more. Now, if I can make $500 editing a podcast and I can do it in half the time compared to another DAW, I just doubled my per hour earnings. And when you're editing for a living, that's all that matters. As for music, I'm less attached to any one DAW. I do like Studio One for PC. I've been using it since I got it as a free version, and a lot of it just makes sense for me. That said, you still have to buy in if you want to use VSTs, and that feature alone, being behind a paywall, may just turn a lot of people off. Now, I've used Pro Tools way back in the day, though I don't do enough with music to really justify that purchase, and I think it's only on a subscription model now. But I also use and love Logic on Mac. If you look at it from an investment perspective, it is rather cheap, and you get the most for your money for it. Once again, though, it is on a Mac. So unless you're planning on staying on the platform forever, yeah. I really do like GarageBand as a starter app though, so if you're in the Mac ecosystem already, I would say give that a go. And finally, though I don't really use Reaper myself, it's really hard to ignore its price and its functionality. Studios are being run on Reaper. If I could start again, I would probably start on Reaper. I mean, that should tell you everything you need to know. Yes, it has more of a learning curve than most programs, but if you master it, I doubt you will ever need another DAW. But what do you think? I know there are a ton of people out there that want to make the case for their DAW. So which ones did I leave out? Should I have focused on more? Let me know down below. Cheers, and thanks for watching.